This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. This week on the Storyworks Roundtable, Scott James joins Catherine and I to talk about genre, but we take a different approach than we normally do. So while we are having a conversation about craft, Scott is a publishing guide, and we couldn't help sliding in a tip about Amazon categories that I think you're going to find really valuable. Whether you're indie or traditional, at the end of the day, you can control how your book is placed in those Amazon categories. So enjoy this episode with Scott James. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Catherine and I are thrilled to have Scott James back with us this week. Scott is a poet, a public typewriter poet as well, and also a publishing guide. So if you haven't heard the last episode, make sure you check it out. We talk about poetry and how to make better prose through understanding a few of the techniques poets use to craft their words. But Scott, welcome back. We're happy to have you here.
It's great to be here. Good to see you both again, all three of you.
That's right. Can you tell us a little bit about your work as a publishing guide? Introduce us to that aspect of what you do.
Sure. So as a publishing guide, I do three things. I do what I call Pathfinder sessions, which if someone has written a manuscript or has an idea for a book and they want to understand what are my options, traditional, hybrid, self-publishing, everything in between, what does it cost, how long does it take, etc. I help them figure out what path to take, find a path. And then I work as the publishing guide. So if somebody wants to do my favorite, which is independent print-on-demand publishing, and a lot of like coaches and consultants and small business owners like to do this because it's faster and you keep creative control and you can do it. You can have a lot of control over the process. Then I act basically as a product manager for the book. So start to finish and teaching people the process step by step to go from a rough draft to a published book. And then the last thing, part 3, is I have developed this very specific expertise around what I call my Amazon bestseller system, or just an Amazon launch protocol. And it has taken me down very, very interesting Byzantine pathways of how Amazon intersects with the traditional publishing world, and also all of these wonderful quirks of the venerable Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So when you have writers coming to you at the beginning stages of their process, do they usually have a genre in mind? Are they trying to write to a specific genre, or do they come to you and say, here's a story I want to write. I don't really know what it is. It's just the story I need to tell.
Yeah, people come with I get all kinds, and it's infinitely fascinating to me as a curious human. But I would say most people write 60 to 80% of a manuscript and then wonder, what do I do with this? And that's when they are on the phone with
right.
And so most people have written, I would say, the bulk of it, and they either don't know how to finish, realize they aren't where they thought they were going to get, or they really like it and they think it's perfect, and they don't need an editor, for example, and they just want to know, can we get this published? And what is it going to take? A week or two? Like, how do we do this? So it's all kinds, but the people that I work with as a guide like that are typically in the nonfiction, self-help business, some memoir, but I only in special cases, but largely how-to type books is what I've narrowed in on. And then I know some people, yourself included, who are very good with, genres and other areas that, I don't have enough expertise in. So I refer out a lot as well. But it helps very quickly. My background was I was originally out in the Bay Area. I was a blogger, and that being there when social media took off, like MySpace, Facebook, Twitter were being born, it was a very interesting atmosphere because that's also when like print on demand technology took off. So that whole sort of mindset of like create it, put it out there. I learned it from a book perspective, like how do you publish ebooks? How do you publish print books? And then I moved to Austin, Texas, where I live now in about 2013. And I worked at one of the largest hybrid publishers in the country, and ended up running their author branding department. And so those are the two main influences. So I haven't spent a lot of time in the traditional world, but it's not surprising that I ended up with sort of this entrepreneurial hybrid independent mindset about how to publish a book of very high quality.
Right. When you were with the hybrid publisher, did you, in the marketing department, did you ever struggle to figure out where to place a book that came across your desk in terms of finding the right genre and getting it connected with the right readers?
Yeah,
or do you have that concern now when clients bring you books?
Yeah. My personal opinion is that the official genre choice of the book is not that important. And I might take some flack in your comments for that. But no, that wasn't my concern. I always started with who's the reader, and what do you want? What do they need to learn to like level up their life, or what problem do they have that they need to solve? Because a reader doesn't go out and look for a book in a certain genre in nonfiction. It's different with fiction, of course. So they might say, well, I really love, steampunk fiction, or I really love thrillers. And so I ended up specializing in sort of these like self-help business nonfiction areas. But a fair number of my authors in the hybrid world and also in my independent coaching are in writing fiction or exploring genre, and especially those people who are launching, because the launch approach, where you really get into the weeds of the difference between genre and Amazon browsing categories and who are your readers and where are they and what are they looking for, and keywords and all of the nitty gritty. There it gets very, soupy. So that's where I'm comfortable, is how do you sort of get yourself where the people who need your book are looking, as opposed. So I come at like, what's the genre choice from that mindset, which has gotten me into some hot water in the sense of debates with people who are more attuned to traditional BISAC categories, which are not super important in my opinion.
Right. Well, I love what you said about starting with the reader first. As a novelist, we're often told to think of your ideal reader and write your story with that person in mind, which is a very different thing from thinking of genre down the road as a marketing category, at least for me. Certainly some writers take the right to market approach, but I think many writers start with, this is the story I want to tell. This is the story I would want to read if someone else had written it, and it just was on a bookshelf. Catherine, you're nodding, so I'm going to make you unmute.
Well, I was able to pass the baby off for an unknown amount of time, so we'll take advantage of it.
Hi, baby.
Excellent.
But yeah, I think a lot of times for me, it's story first, genre second, like in terms of like, what am I writing? And I think sometimes genre helps me to define what I'm writing. You know what I'm saying? So like I'll have an idea and then I think, well, where do I want to place it? Is it contemporary? Is it science fiction? Is it fantasy? Or like, if I had an idea in nonfiction, I don't write nonfiction, but if I had that idea, I think I would be similar. Here's my idea. And then how do I define it in narrow down into what I actually want to write, if that makes sense. And it helps, I think, I know Robert has said this in previous episodes. Sorry, Robert couldn't be here today, but where he says, sometimes narrowing that right. down, it helps, right? It helps our creativity to have a smaller box. And so I think sometimes genre can be helpful in that way to kind of pull out the stuff that maybe is unnecessary for what like a reader would want to see versus what I could go spiraling off into just because I can, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, thinking of your genre as narrowing the field for you and helping create a parameter that will then expand your creativity by making you work within those parameters. But if we're narrowing the field, are we getting into subgenres or crossing genres? Like how? Give us more, Catherine.
I don't know about that. I don't know that I thought that deeply about that, honestly.
Okay. Well, isn't it? Go ahead, Scott.
I love what you said, and so I will take that home. Story first, genre second, and maybe that's something that is, maybe that's your phrase, or maybe it's something that is talked about in fiction craft circles, or more than I'm aware of. But I think that's a perfect phrase. Certainly story first.
I mean, I say it all the time, but I won't claim it's unique or
it's great.
I mean,
and but the way it applies to my work, and I think what I'll add to it, or what you both say, is I was shaped by that sort of the author brand department. So even though you got to take the word brand as kind of like brand, but take it with a grain of salt. What doing that forced me to do, like writing, hundreds of brand strategies, is that I came to think of a book as it is a flag that you're planting in the universe, and what you call it, the picture on the front, and what the message of it, like the mission of that book and the story that's within it, whether it's a nonfiction or a fiction story, that's what your life, at least your artistic life, is about for the next while. For most people, it's probably a year or two. For some people who publish a lot faster, it might be less. But even then, you're probably doing a series. So
for others, it's their lifetime.
It might be your lifetime. Or you're building a business on top of it, or you're building a speaking tour on top of it, or you're building, maybe you're trying to eventually get a movie deal, or whatever it is, like you're going to be talking about that. So to choose genre first is a challenging thing, because your heart is going to have to be in it and stronger in 3 years than it is today. And so it doesn't mean to just go willy-nilly. I don't think of it that way, but it does mean that as you make important choices, planting the flag that you can stand behind, and that is the thing that you want to, manifest, or the thing that you want to cultivate in various conversations, is first. And then the way that translates in marketing, and the reason that I personally de-emphasize genre And I don't mean to be like the hill that I die on. But basically I think, well, once you've created a book that is honest, whether it's a fiction or nonfiction, once you've created a book that is yours, then, either you're building an audience or you have an audience from whatever exists, your platform. That's where your book's going to sell first. And those folks you're not going to find them through genre. You're finding them through any number of other ways. And then it builds out from there. So genre is important maybe when you go after a book pub promotion or something, or when you're putting your book on Amazon, which I know we're going to get to, but it's not a driver as much as a tool. So I love the story first, genre second. That's
right.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you. And you create this piece of work, whether it's fiction, we'll say art, or nonfiction, we'll call it whatever you're crafting, whatever message you want to craft. You put so much into it that makes it specific and unique and representative of yourself. I love what you were saying about it planting a flag, not, for me, not in the sense of like claiming the territory, but in the sense of being a signal to others, like, here's what I have to offer, the beacon, to draw people to your work. And when you publish it and you put it out there to share with the world, it can be very frustrating when you're ticking the boxes on Amazon and you're like, well, okay, historical. Okay, how do I get the right readers? How do I get that ideal reader that I envisioned while I was creating my story to find this book when the pool is so broad? And Scott, I know you have some advice for us on this. So,
yes. In my publishing guide work, I spend a lot of time in the catacombs of Amazon. And one of the things that I find, this is just such a wonderful thing, is that bottom line, there are almost, well over 1,000 and approaching 2,000 categories and subcategories on Amazon.com for books.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are probably a writer, and you've maybe heard me talk about the StoryWorks reading series. It is the new branch in the StoryWorks family tree. It is a literary journal podcast. That's right, a hybrid, a literary journal for your ears, with a print anthology at the end of the year of the best of the podcast. I am open for submissions, and I want to see your best prose right now. I am taking both fiction and creative nonfiction. You can read the guidelines and submit your work at storyworkspodcast.com/submit. What are you waiting for? It's time to see your stories published and sit on the other side of this microphone from me. Have a conversation about your storycraft.
So,
wow.
But if you upload your book to KDP, or your publisher uploads your book to KDP, you're going to get shuttled into sort of this list that they give you at the outset, which is only a couple hundred. And so as you would expect, the outcome is that most books are just in those categories, because you think, well, I uploaded, I tick my boxes, and I hope everything works out. Cross my fingers, do whatever marketing you're going to do. But the reality is, you as an author can create, an Amazon Central account, and you can change the categories, and you can have up to 10 for your book total. So like 5 print, 5 ebook, or you could overload on ebook. But basically you aren't stuck with the ones that you pick at the outset, nor are you limited to 2 or 3. So sometimes Amazon will add them on based on how people shop. Like if they're starting in a category, like if they're shopping for thrillers and they keep finding and buying your book, you might end up in the thriller category, whether you put yourself there or not, or a thriller subgenre. And so this right there, just if you're thinking to yourself, anybody out there, like, well, I don't even know what category my book's in right now, or I never really thought about it. First of all, this is a huge thing, and we'll get to the other pieces, but I love it because you are in control. So even if a publisher published your book, you can go in and alter these on Amazon through the Author Central. And so that can help with any number of things. For marketing purposes, it helps with discoverability, because you can go on Amazon and you can look around and say, well, I'm just going to type a bunch of, like, I bet people who would enjoy my book would search for a book like this. And then you can type it in, like, crazy thriller in Texas, and see what comes up. And then go look at those people's books, and you can scroll down and see what categories they're in. And if you find a category that 2 or 3 of those books are in that you've never heard of, you can click through to that category and see, well, what are the top 10 or 20 books in that category? And it'll just tell you. And then you've unlocked the treasure trove, because you realize, oh, these are the books that are being shown to people who are looking for what I think people who would like my book would be looking for. So, am I using those keywords? Am I in those categories? If the answer is no, you're missing out, and you have the power to change that. Craft-wise, if you are writing a book,
mm-hmm.
or just interested as an author and a curious person like me, you can just do this. Just go type and explore, just be a spelunker in the cave, and you can go and like sift through these sort of random feeling, because they are kind of random, Amazon categories for books. And it really just, you'll get like really down into these specifics, like literature, biography, Midwestern biography, Midwestern men biography. And it just really, or thriller, steampunk, Gothic steampunk, and you'll get into these really interesting deep categories. And when you open it up, there's all these books. And whether you think those books are high quality or not, all of the reviews that anyone's ever written about them are online. And you can go read through, and you can see, based on the reviews, what do people love about books in these categories. And then you can decide, well, that's what my book is about, so I'm going to use those words to talk about my book when it does come time to do the chore of marketing. Or you can say, if everybody hates this particular thing, I'm going to create a character that doesn't do that. Or, whatever it is, like you can choose to follow the trend, or you can choose to intentionally buck the trend. And covers, same thing. Like when it comes time to craft your cover, you can intentionally use the colors and the images and the fonts that all the books that are selling well in your genre or in the subcategories are using. Or you can say, mine's going to stand out. So everybody uses black and yellow and green. I'm going to use pink, and I'm going to use, I'm going to use a spaceship instead of, you can just have a lot of, rather than being led by, well, what do I think this person would like? The answer is there. Like you literally know in real time, this is what they like. And they'll tell you. You can just scroll through and look for super reviewers and see, what do they say? And so I think that is craft wise, you don't want to get stuck in the thing where you're just writing to the crowd. Of course, that's a creativity killer. But
right.
If you write something, finding out, like starting with topic rather than genre, starting with searches, starting with interest in the search box, and then figuring out what subcategories, what genres does Amazon call that, is a really interesting side door into this whole world. And then to bring it back,
yeah, that is. Do you find that?
To bring it back, you can then.
I was going to ask. Do you find
these 8 categories or 4? I'm gonna, put myself in that category. I'm gonna call Amazon and do it.
Yeah. Do you find that some of the categories get drilled down so much that they become obscure? I've noticed sometimes on books when I look at where they're ranking, it'll be, I'll make one up for Skog Hall. Murder, mystery, ghost story, Midwest, Mississippi River, rural, amateur, detective. You're like, what? Okay, come on, that's not a category. That's, oh wait, I could be number 1 in that. Like, is there kind of a zone where it's really useful, and then a zone where the competition is too big, and a zone where it's ridiculously too narrow?
Well, I think about it a couple ways. And if I have my sort of marketer book launch hat on, there's no category too narrow. Like if I find a category with 3 books in it, let's get it. It's not the only place, but let's do this. But the interesting thing to me about Amazon categories is, and people have all kinds of opinions about Amazon and what it's doing to independent bookstores or not. So just know that I'm addressing this from, I don't personally have any issue with Amazon. It is what it is. And it's an amazing treasure trove of information and opportunity for people to get things out there. I also love independent bookstores, and I buy books from my, Book People, which is the Austin one. There's room for both, is my sort of take. But what Amazon has done is the subcategories that get really, really specific are because that's what people are looking for. So that's, to me, like the gem of wisdom in those things. They didn't just make that up. They made it up because they have billions and billions of searches in a computer brain somewhere. And that's, people are looking for what you just described, ghost stories, Midwest, with an amateur detective. Therefore, it is a search category. Like that's how, Amazon wouldn't do that if they weren't going to make money from it. So the translation of Amazon's going to make money from it is people are interested in that, which means I have an opportunity. I can look at the books in there and say, well, people are interested in this. What about this are they interested in? And that's what's in the reviews. So that's the part that can influence your craft. It's like having this giant public experiment of peer readers of books like yours. So to me, it's infinitely fascinating because you can see what are these books that I respect, and what does the general public think? Like, do people like the same things I like, or do they like other things? So there's that aspect of it. There's sort of you can hack that system for yourself and say, well, my book, I think, is more or less like the books in these 8 categories. So I'm going to call Amazon and tell them to put my book in these 8 categories. And then also you can use it for research for your writing process. And then for a book launch, like you're saying, you can absolutely choose what I consider like a set of categories or browse categories that are relevant to your book. They're appropriate. Your book should be a member of that category, but they're not
Right.
The sort of, like, it's, for example, it's not thriller. Like thriller, you're going to be competing against the best-selling thriller books of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of category that you're going to get shuttled into when you launch your book. You're not going to be in, Midwest thriller, ghost story, detective, amateur sleuth. So you have to either get placed in there by the Amazon magical gods, or you just call them up and put yourself in there if your publisher doesn't do it. And the breakthrough for most people is learning.
So how do you do that?
Well, so you create an Amazon Author Central account. You go to the Contact Us area, and you have two options. You can either call them, or what happens in there is you click a button and it has them call you, and then you're placed on hold. And then somebody will pick it up and you just say, I would like to change the categories that my book's in. They'll verify that you're the author, and then you can just read the browse paths to them, and they'll do it. 48 hours later, There you go. The other alternative is they have a form you can click through, and there's sort of, it's findable if you get in there. So you just go to Contact Us and you can upload the browse paths and submit the form. It's like a help ticket. So either of those are available to you, but I have found that calling them is more reliable and faster. More reliable in the sense that if you submit the form, it can take more than 48 hours to, I think it just gets placed in a queue. They get to it when they get to it. Mm-hmm. Which I can't fault them for.
Right. No. No. Wow. That is such a great tip for getting our books into our readers' hands. Yeah. As we wrap this episode up, Catherine, do you have any questions or any thoughts about, I don't know, we slid into marketing territory here, which is okay. Once in a blue moon.
No, I think it's good though, because like you said, you can use it on both sides, right? So if you're just starting your book, you've got this idea and you're like, oh man, does anyone even read this? Like if I invest the next year, 2 years, 5 years of my life into this, does this even, and then you can find those pitfalls and those things that maybe you hadn't thought about before. I think that's good for development and for writing, and then for revision. And then bonus, now you have your marketing started already. So I think it's cool because you can kind of use your curiosity to explore, something that maybe we haven't thought enough about, which is the way that readers already find books. So, yeah.
Right. You just reminded me of something, Catherine. For me, absolutely story first genre down the road, but thinking of this as a crafting tool and not just exclusively a marketing tool. One of our other guests on the show, Carly Tressel, was saying, and I believe that she said this on the show, maybe it was just in conversation to me, but Carly wrote a YA story about, a girl on a sports team, and she said there was like the wise grandmother character because she loved this character, wrote her, invested her great part of the story, and then after the book was done, she discovered like every YA sports female protagonist story had a wise grandma, and this character she loved so much and invested so much in was now a cliche. So, if you can do a little bit of digging beforehand while you're conceptualizing your story, you might avoid certain pitfalls.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, at least I love that example, because at least whether you avoid it or do it, you can be intentional. You don't have to wonder. Like that would have been great for her to know. This character, every book and every movie and every story like this has this character. how interesting, because then if she knew that, she still could have had the character, but she could have said, oh, well, I'm going to twist it in an interesting way. Or I see that everybody hates it when the wise grandmother does this. So I'll tweak it and,
right.
one way or the other. And it's the same for any genre. And one last piece, because I can't help it with the marketing, is that you can use this understanding about these categories. Like if you know that and you put in the work up front, there are a variety of tools that you can use to research these also. Or you can just, poke around on Amazon yourself. And if you can get if you put your ebook, for example, up for pre-order, you can get your book in these categories that you want to be in. In a lot of cases, they'll be significantly less competitive if it's like a very specific. So you have a good shot at ranking as a new release or as a bestseller when it clicks over and it's available and it launches. So there's all kinds of strategies that you can choose around that or not. So it's really good for craft. And then when it comes time to launch the book, it can be a real help. And, Amazon is a store, so they like to see things sell. So if you can show that you're good at selling books in a category or 3 or 10, they will help you.
Absolutely. Wow, that is great. Great to know. Really, next time I have a book ready to go, man, I am all over this. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us, Scott.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? StoryWorks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in StoryWorks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alita. Check out StoryWorksFiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at StoryWorksPodcast.com.